everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Welcome to your session, Using a Data Dialogue Protocol to Improve Student Outcomes. I hope you made it to the session that you wanted. My name is Leslie Wisdom. I'll be the Zoom room host today, and kind of just helping to provide some housekeeping items at the very beginning this morning. So each of you should stay on mute during the presentation, or sorry, I should say each of the attendees should stay on mute during the presentation this morning. If you have questions or comments, you're welcome to put them in the Zoom chat or the Whova app chat. So our presenters can see the chat in Zoom, but they cannot see the chat or the Q&A in the Whova app. So I'll be helping to monitor the things on the Whova end, but our presenters can see things on the Zoom end. So just feel free to use either one of those that you're comfortable with. All of the materials so far have been uploaded to the session in Whova, so you're welcome to download those materials. If other things come up, our presenters have said that they're willing to share other things if there happens to be other items that come up. And at the end of the session, I will ask that you please rate this session, and that's found right in the Whova app, right underneath the title of the session. You'll see a button that says Rate Session. So I think that's all the housekeeping that I have, and I'm going to turn it over to our presenters.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and good morning, everyone. We are very happy to be with you. We were hoping that you would take a minute and introduce yourself in the chat to us so we know who's in the room. I do see some familiar faces, so or familiar names, I should say, because I'm not seeing a lot of faces right now, but we're excited to be with you this morning. So I'll ask Tom to introduce himself, and then I'll tell you a little bit about me and about our consortium.
Hello, everyone. My name's Tom Allison. I'm a principal at the Escondido Adult School in Escondido, California, and a member school of the Education to Career Network, which I believe Kathleen's going to tell you a little bit about.
Right. Thank you, Tom. So I'm Kathleen Porter, and I am the Executive Director of Career Technical Adult and Alternative Education in Poway Unified School District. So that's a mouthful. I've been in adult education and in the CTE world for a very long time. I think that has given me a lot of experiences and opportunities to be able to get to know you and learn from mistakes. And so those are things that we want to have an opportunity to share with you this morning as we talk about implementing a data dialogue protocol. So our consortium is a 6-member consortium. This is our adult education consortium, and we call ourselves the Education to Career Network of San Diego County, North San Diego County. And you can see that we have 3 larger adult schools, Poway, Escondido, and Vista. We have Palomar College. And then we have 2 smaller adult schools, Ramona and San Marcos. And so among the 6 of us, we're serving a region that is more than 2,500 square miles. It reaches to Julian, Borrego Springs, Fallbrook, Valley Center, Palma. So a lot of different needs in those communities. So now I'm going to turn things over to Tom, and he's going to do a little warm-up exercise with us to think about some quotes.
Okay, to get us into a data-driven mindset this morning, we're going to review 7 quotes about data, and they're going to automatically parse, maybe even before I'm finished describing it. And in the chat, we'd like you to please identify one of those quotes that resonates with you and why it does.
Here's the first one.
Okay, well, that ends the stream of 7 quotes. And I'm not seeing any thoughts about the quotes. Kathleen, you might want to jump to the first quote again and have it run through one more time. And I prepared a quote response if we don't get any others.
Yeah, when you read these, do any of them stand out to you? Anything that you're seeing here? Let's see, I went too far. Oh, thank you. Esteban says the quote regarding shining light is something that resonated. Here was the second one. The third one. Fourth one. And I see Melissa, you're liking the goal is to turn data into information and then information into insight. And this is the one that Esteban, I think you liked. And Nate, you are agreeing that the starting point, data is the starting point, not the end point. Any other thoughts about that? Tommy, you want me to move along?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, great. And Svetlana, yeah, you're also agreeing to the data into information and then to insight. Exactly. So today, we have 5 objectives that we're going to be looking at. We're going to become familiar with a data dialogue protocol process. So this is a very formalized process. You'll hear about our own experience and what we learned when we implemented this protocol. We're going to give you an opportunity to practice using this specific protocol. You should leave here with an increased ability to interpret data and to figure out how to make data meaningful, and also to be able to identify some steps to use data or use this protocol in your own agency or your own environment. So we're going to talk a little bit about data-driven cultures. As I said, we're going to look at this protocol. And I think we've talked about all of these things. You'll be able to think about next steps. So in terms of a warm-up, I'm just going to show you these 4 little pictures. And I want you to kind of be thinking about what's a theme that you see with these. So you see the one cartoon, one guy sees a 6, one guy sees a 9. The other cartoon, we've got somebody so excited because they see a boat. Then we have the guy on the boat so excited because he sees land. One guy here is looking at 4 logs while the other person sees 3 logs. And then we have this old woman kind of in a scarf. And we also have a young woman with a hat. So what are some of the themes that we're seeing with these 4 different cartoons? And how might they apply to, what implications do we have for looking at data? Okay, Joyce, thank you. It's in the eye of the beholder. And Leslie identifies that there are differences in perceptions. Exactly. So people can look at the same things and see, so you can look at the same facts, but you can see them in different ways, right? There's no right way to see the facts. You can choose to see the facts in multiple ways. So for example, when you look at the old woman and the young woman, sometimes you might need somebody to help you see it their way. And the language that we use is actually something that can help us see things in different ways. And so when we talk about a data dialogue protocol, if you think about what each of those words really mean, so you're looking at data, but you're having a dialogue about the data, and it's that dialogue that helps us make meaning of data and do it in a consistent way where we're all seeing it in the same way. And so what we're going to talk about a little bit more is exactly why that's so important. So we know that data points are discussion points. We know that if you want to change a culture, you can change a culture by changing the conversation. And so having these discussions, having this dialogue about specific data points can begin to change your culture so that you have this opportunity to have what we would like to call a data-driven culture. So some of the things that are just background before you even start thinking about implementing a data dialogue protocol is to think about the difference between discussion and dialogue. And so the work that we did on our very first data dialogue, we talked about what is the difference between discussion and dialogue. And so with discussion, we say the goal is to reach a decision. You're advocating ideas. It's maybe one idea pitted against another. So when you think back on those pictures, there wasn't a right idea. It's that both ideas were right. Oh, I don't know why it hopped backwards here. The other idea that you might hear when you're having a discussion with somebody is somebody may actually say to you, yes, but, because they're waiting to make their point. So they listen to what you said, but they say, yes, but here's my opinion. So with dialogue, oh, do we have this on a timer? I'm sorry if we do. With a dialogue, it's a little bit different. The goal here is to understand. So you're listening to understand what the other person is seeing. You're suspending your point of view in order to understand what the other person is seeing. And you're looking for the third story. How can both of these opinions, or how can both of these things be true? So you're listening. You're looking for that larger context. It gives meaning to both points of view. And instead of saying yes, but, when you're having a dialogue, what you should be hearing is yes, and something else. And then we talk about these 3 levels of listening. So the 3 levels of listening, there's defensive listening, perspective taking listening, and then empathetic listening. So with dialogue, you're really trying to move into that empathetic listening. There are 3 questions that we ask when you are asking questions in a data dialogue. One is, am I advocating for my position, or am I seeking to understand what the other person has to say? The second question you're asking is, am I being certain, or am I being curious? And obviously, we want to be curious because we want to understand how somebody else is seeing data. And then the third question for self-check is, what's the third story? Is there a both and here? Can both of these opinions, or can both of these viewpoints exist in a larger context? So that's really what we start with. And then in terms of this group dialogue discussions and the research behind the protocol that we use is one that was developed by the School Reform Initiative, and it's research-based. So it uses specific questioning strategies and a combination of private think time and group think time and discussion in order to really start to build consensus around what people are seeing and what data says. So that's just a little bit of an introduction on the background. So the protocol itself, again, it's the School Reform Initiative's data-driven dialogue protocol that we use. And I'm just going to give you kind of a broad overview of the protocol itself. Our implementation, what we learned, and then Tom's going to take you through a guided practice. So you'll have this opportunity to dive in and look at some of our data and participate in your own little mini version of a data dialogue. So you can see that the first stage is predictions. So this is before any data is even passed out. You tell people, we're going to look at this. What do you predict you're going to see? So they haven't even seen data. The point of this particular phase is really to get people out of their own, people like to be right, and it's almost impossible for them to resist making some prediction when they know. So it's okay, you get that out of the way. They predict data, that's what we do in the very first thing. Then you pass out the data, and people have an opportunity to examine the data very cursory, because what we really want to do is tell them what the data is, how the data is organized. So if there are columns, you're defining the columns, you're defining how the data was gathered. It's really explaining what they're going to look at and how it's organized, not necessarily what the data say at this point. And you give folks an opportunity to ask questions like, oh, I see this abbreviation. What does this mean? Or what quarter was this data gathered? You know, any of those kinds of questions, they have a chance to ask questions, and that's very brief. So that's what you do at the first part. Then we go visual. So this is the big step 2. And what going visual means is that the participants in your data dialogue have an opportunity to mark up the data. This is an opportunity for them to highlight it, make it their own. So maybe they're making their own little chart. Maybe they have a chart paper and they're looking at comparing this grade level and this grade level, or they're looking at 3 years of data and they're trying to just zero in. But this is where people make their data, make the data that you presented their own. That going visual can be done independently, or it can be done in small groups, but it should be done, you know, in a very small group, like 2 or 3, because it's really just making meaning of the data at this point. And then phase 3 is what we call observations. And so this is done in a round robin format where you go around the room and people make an observation. So the observations are things that you see. They're objective. It resists going to why, or it resists explaining the facts. So the observations might be, the sentence starters might be, I can count, I can see that, I notice that, but it's something very specific that the data show. And so this is done, as I said, in a round robin format. So you go around the group and everyone will say what they observe in the data, while the rest of us have our data sheet out and we're looking to see what that person saw. What is the observation? And you keep going around the room until you have this opportunity to get to all of the observations that were made about the data. From that point, we get into the inferences. And so that's the first time we start thinking about, what does this mean? What are some additional data that we think we need in order to really understand this? Or you might suspect that something's happening and I want to see additional data to support that. Then we talk about implications for teaching and learning. So that's the whole protocol. That's kind of how we go through looking at data. And it sounds like it's really prescriptive, and it is, but let me tell you, it is life-changing in an organization. So the facilitation plan, when you do a data dialogue, it can take anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes, depending upon how much data you're actually looking at. And the place that we spend the most time is in the going visual, because that's where people are really identifying the data, making it their own, and determining what it is that they see. And so you can see that in this facilitation plan, going visual could be, you could spend 30 minutes just on people understanding the data and drawing conclusions about the data. When we do the implications and the debrief, that's also how we decide what data we want to see at the next meeting. So I'll talk a little bit more about our own implementation. So why did we decide to do this? Well, we had a lot of staff turnover, and we noticed that people really weren't understanding how we were serving students and what our gaps and needs were. And so we said, we really need people to get up to speed on data. And I talked a little bit about what the problems were that we were trying to solve. I mean, it could be anything from enrollment numbers, it could be completion numbers. You start to notice that that you have leaks in the pipeline from when students come to orientation to completing the program. So where are students falling out, and why, and what data can we look at to help us with that? I did an open invitation when we first started doing a data dialogue. I invited everyone on our staff, and I said, we're going to serve lunch. We're going to do it on, the third Wednesday, and we did 90 minutes, and everybody, opted in to this opportunity for us. And we organized the meetings. I think that ideally you have, the way we did it, we kind of had a closed, you had to commit to at the beginning of the year that you were going to participate. And then we scheduled 6 meetings a year the first year. And then we had people attend each of those meetings. So we got better and better, and we didn't have to keep introducing the protocol. So we introduced the protocol at the first meeting, and we did a mini practice, kind of like what we're doing here today. And then in the second meeting, we were actually able to determine, go through a full data dialogue around specific data. How much did it cost? Just the cost of lunch. That was the cost to us. So the data that we used in our implementation was is almost exclusively CASAS data. We were doing it in the adult school environment where we were looking at our WIOA numbers, but you can do it with any data, any outcome data that you are regularly collecting. We had both quantitative and qualitative results. With our adult ed program, it's a performance-based contract that we receive for WIOA, and we doubled our payment points in our EL Civics program. We also, in our adult secondary education program, we increased our payment points for high school diploma and high school equivalency by more than 30%, just in the first year. It was like, wow, who knew? We increased the numbers of paired scores. So in our adult ed WIOA world, we have a pre-test and a post-test, and we match those tests for students. And so we were able to increase that. The other thing that we noticed is we didn't increase enrollments, but we did increase persistency. So the students that we served, we were serving better. We didn't serve more students, but we served the students that we were serving better. For qualitative results, I think our staff, these are some of the comments that they told us after the first year of implementation. They thought it was informative, it focused instruction on specific topics, it got them to see a bigger picture. They felt like it really promoted a culture of discussion without judgment. And that was actually one of the, I think in terms of just creating a data culture, that's an important fact because sometimes people are afraid to share data publicly. So with the insights, that whole piece of fear of airing data publicly, that was something that we really, that I think we were able to get over in our culture. I think we thought that it worked well to have the whole team look at data, not just individuals look at their own data. Certainly having dedicated time to do this work, asking people to make a commitment, and then sticking to the time frame. So the meetings start and end on time. What didn't work, I think we have gotten better and better about understanding what is a reasonable chunk or a size of data to look at, because I think you want it to be manageable. You don't want too much data. The time constraints and then deviating from the protocol. The first year, everyone felt kind of weird about the going visual part. So we kind of just skipped over the going visual part and we jumped more into the observations. And that was really a mistake because I think going again back to the research behind really having time to see things, to discuss things, and make the data your own informs that step of observations. So those were some of our learnings. What are we doing now? We're continuing the data dialogue process. We do this every school year. We've also expanded the data dialogue to our consortium. So our whole consortium participates in a quarterly data dialogue. We have all kinds of new accomplishments that include, revising our board policy, looking into acceleration strategies and integrated instruction. Last year, we really did a deep dive in equity and inclusion and looking at disaggregating our data. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for us in making this better and better and better. So with that, I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to turn things over to Tom, and he's going to let us practice a data dialogue protocol. And Tom, I'm going to stop sharing, and then you'll be able to share.
Okay. Okay, so everyone should be able to see a screen titled Data Dialogue. Is that the case?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right, well, let me just kind of go into a little bit of our history at the Escondido Adult School with Data Dialogue. Following Kathleen's lead in the consortium and myself participating as a participant in Data Dialogue at Poway Adult School, and then as a member of consortium, myself and our other co-principal, Stacey Adame, we decided to actually implement the Data Dialogue protocol at Escondido Adult School. And we've used it to drive what we're calling our equity challenges to improve student retention, vertical transitioning in our ESL programs, and program rigor across the board. We're new to the dialogue and therefore follow the protocol religiously. And I think it's a good framework to fall on. And hopefully you'll find that to be true as we go through the protocol ourselves. And the first phase that Kathleen talked about in the first phase of the data dialogue is the prediction phase. In the prediction phase, as Kathleen said, people want to assert their bias right away and make judgments and based on whatever focus question might be attached to the data they're looking at. And I don't think this is a bad thing. And in fact, I think it's a strength, because what it does is it brings to the surface and it affords an opportunity for each participant to claim where they're coming from. And if there's going to be growth, you got to know where you're starting. So in the prediction phase, we're surfacing perspectives, beliefs, assumptions, et cetera, based on a focus question attached to a set of data. So what we're using a data set that we actually used at our last Education to Career Network leadership meeting, where representatives from each of the schools were there to look at consortium data. And the purpose of this prediction phase is to cause reflection. And so we're going to give you some private think time, some sentence frames that allow you to attack this in the way that's intended in the protocol, is to start your predictions with statements such as I assume, I predict, I wonder, or my expectations are influenced by. And we're going to make some prediction statements that start with these frame starters based on this focus question. So what the data we're going to look at hopefully will talk towards this question. And the question is, what trends will we see in student enrollment and diplomas earned from 2018 to 2020 in the Education to Career Network's ESL, adult secondary education, and CTE programs? So basically, we want to know what trends are there in enrollment and diplomas earned in the past 3 years. So we'd like everyone to take some time, think about that, make a prediction, and post that prediction in the chat. So I'll give us about 90 seconds to do that. Seeing several comments predicting enrollment drops. Esteban has predicted an increase in those measures. Leslie is predicting that enrollment and diplomas earned have decreased over that 3-year period of time. Okay, any more predictions? Andrea is sure that enrollment has dropped, but not really sure about diplomas since some students responded well to the online curriculum. And then we see for 2 years, changes would be slight depending on work within areas. Okay, so what we're going to do now is move from the first phase of making predictions, and we're going to go to our second phase that Kathleen talked about, the going visual. So when we go visual, we want to spend time looking at the data. Today, again, we're using a data set that we used a few weeks ago for the Education to Career Network. We took a more expansive view of the data since we had a good hour and a half to work on it. Since we're condensing this data dialogue to a 20-minute protocol, we're going to have to kind of condense things. Now, I'm not sure how to access the shared folder space.
I just put the link in the chat for everybody.
Oh, fantastic. So there's a link to go ahead and pull up this document here. I'll try to pull it into focus a little bit. But we have the same data represented in 2 different ways. First is a data table. And so you can see the 3 years, 18-19, 1920, and 2021. And in each of those tables, we track the data for the 3 programs: English as a Second Language, ESL, Adult Basic Education or Adult Secondary Education, and our CTE or Career to Technical program. And so for each 3 of those programs, for 2021, we see the enrollees count. For 1920, we see the number of enrollees and the total. And then for 18-19, we see the enrollment in each of those programs and the total. Additionally, you see the column titled HSD-HSE. That stands for High School Diploma and High School Equivalency. For our purposes, we're going to consider that diplomas awarded. So for instance, in the 2021 school year, 187 diplomas were awarded in our consortium's Adult Basic Education and Adult Secondary Education programs. So if there's any questions about the data, please post them on the chat. We'll try to answer them. Additionally, on that chart, if we move up, we'll see the enrollment data pictured as a chart rather than just numbers in a table. And then we see the HSD, HSE, or the diplomas represented as a chart as well. So I'm going to give you some time to take a look at the data and work with the data. So what the protocol wants you to do is, actually you would have the paper in front of you if we were doing this in person, and we would encourage you to highlight trend lines, do math calculations, color code related trends, really get dirty, get intimate with the data so that you become familiar with it. Typically, we do this in pairs or triads, and today we're going to do this on our own. So I'm going to give you some time to look at the data and process it. So let's take about 2 minutes and see if that's enough time. Okay. Whenever I'm engaged in a Zoom, I'm very impressed by our teaching staff that does this every day. I'm not sure in terms of feedback if we've had enough time to look at the data, but again, we're in a little bit of a time crunch, so I'm going to try to move us forward. But know that if we had the typical amount of time, we would be paired up, we would be looking at the data and really digesting it. So now we're going to move to the third phase. And in the third phase, we've had time to look at the data and work with it a bit. And in this phase, we're making observations. We're directed to make factual observations about these data sets, free from value statements, disclaimers, or personal interjections. So we want to focus on the facts, and we want to make statements that could be started with these sentence frames. I observe that. Patterns I notice include, I can count. I am surprised that I see. And we want to avoid statements such as because, therefore, it seems, however. Those statements attach value to the data that we don't want to do yet. We get a little bit into that in the next phase. So right now we're just making factual observations. And I'd like you to take a few moments and enter a factual statement regarding the data in the chat. And maybe what I need to do is put the data back onto the screen. So let's do that. So I'm seeing some of the observations. I noticed that diplomas and equivalencies went up in 2020 over 2019. I observed that enrollees in CTE, in fact, decreased from 18 to 20. I observed that enrollment decreased for all three groups. I observed that enrollment dropped all 3 years for the ESL program. I observed that total enrollees dropped over the 2 years by about a half. I see that the 2021 ESL enrollment went down to a greater degree than in other programs. I observed that diplomas increased in the adult secondary education from 19 to 20. I observed that diplomas earned dropped from 18 to 19, but increased from 19 to 20. And then finally, although enrollment dropped 47% during the time period, diplomas dropped 31%. So with less enrollees, a higher percentage gained a diploma. And I really appreciate that all these statements were factual statements. So we're doing really good. And then finally, we move into the fourth phase, which is the inference phase, which allows us to attach meaning to the facts. So in this fourth and final phase, we're going to generate hypotheses, we're going to make inferences, we're going to explain what we see in the data and draw some conclusions and hopefully define new actions. So our sentence framing for focusing us on how to move forward in this phase, we want to make our statements start with comments such as, I believe the data suggest, because additional data that might confirm my thinking is, appropriate responses to what we see might be, and then what data do we need to monitor any potential response we might come up with. So again, you'll have some private think time, but I'd like you to enter in the chat in the next moment or two an inferential thought starting with one of these frames. Okay, we've got about a minute more. Any other inferences that anyone would like to make before we move on? Okay, well then I'll just share my inference that I put into the chat. I believe the data suggests some students are able to gain a diploma more easily with virtual instruction. Oh wait, this is not mine. Someone popped in, thank you very much. Andrea shared with us that the data suggests some students are able to gain a diploma more easily with virtual instruction. I agree. This may be due to the added flexibility this provides. I agree with that as well. My comment had to do with our online instructional delivery program, Edgenuity, which was ready to serve distance learning out of the box. So that helped our school respond. In closing, this is just a real short sample and kind of condensed and not real in certain ways, but this was the dialogue and following the protocol that it stipulates. If you're interested, you can Google SRI and data-driven dialogue, and it will explain the dialogue fully. And I hope you learned something by going through the dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you everybody for participating. So we are now on the wrap up and closing. We've got about 7 minutes left. So one thing I'm interested to know is from this brief orientation to a data-driven protocol, is this something that you think would be easily implemented at your agency, or do you have additional questions on how you might get started? We can use this time for questions. What do you think?
I have a question.
Okay, Joyce.
Yeah, and you had mentioned earlier that you skipped the go visual part when you were doing this with your team. What was the reason for doing that? I'm curious.
Okay, well, I hope you also heard me say that was a terrible mistake.
Yes.
The first year, we kind of just didn't understand what was the importance of going visual. And so we spent a lot of time on the observations. But as we reflected that year, we really, we noticed that we deviated from the protocol. And so we said, okay, next year we're going to follow the protocol exactly, because that small group of really understanding or forming questions or talking through what the data we're trying to communicate was a really essential part of the process. And so why did we do it the first year? I think we felt silly, like making charts. But the second year, we realized the value of that. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. And that's what I had thought that was probably what was going on. My second question, or not a question, more of a comment. I think this framework is very useful. I know that in my own work, it's trying to get everyone to sit down and talk about data it's not something fun or looked forward to, but I think the way that it's organized, I think it would be much more engaging for everyone to do it this way, and I quite like it, actually.
I do too, and I will say that one of the things that, one of the learnings that I really had was this protocol is kind of fun. Like people actually feel like, oh, it's fun. We get to go to data dialogue. And the other thing is we used to look at data in the context of a regular staff meeting. And that was a huge mistake. And so calling it out so it happens at this particular time and it's all anyone's focused on is, I think that's another reason that it was really able to be transformative in our environment. Other questions or comments? What do you think, people?
I'll just piggyback on that. I really appreciate the protocol because it allows for several things. It allows for what the human nature side of things to state what I believe, and honors it a little bit because we are data collecting machines. So without realizing it, we're taking in all kinds of data and we're making predictions. But what we don't have is all the data, and we latch onto our biases, unfortunately, too often. But this protocol allows for that. And also, especially in kind of going over the data in small groups, you're looking at the data with people that have different windows. So it's kind of protocol for opening your eyes to other viewpoints. And I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. Oh, yeah, and I see your comment, Joyce. Thank you. Yes, it seems to help reduce and eliminate judgment. Definitely, it does. And it also makes it everyone's work. I think that was one of the things, like for us to have a team of people from across the agencies when we notice things, other people could say, oh, what could I do to help support this? Or, you know, so I think it's really created some whole organization responses to things, so people don't feel as lonely or isolated. So I see that we have 2 minutes left. So I'll just say that you have our contact information, both mine and Tom's here. And if you have any other questions after we close today, you're welcome to contact us. We'd be happy to share. If you'd like to attend one of our data dialogues and be a silent observer, you're certainly welcome to do that. I know Tom, when he was first implementing, came and watched Poway do it, and now we've had lots of practice, so we'd be happy to share that practice with you. And then, of course, we just have the links to the school reform initiative and the actual protocol itself here at the end of the presentation. These are also in, I guess it's a Whova link. Leslie, for all the resources from presenters. So you have this slideshow, you can use it how you want. And then there's a little video here that talks about Poway's implementation of a data-driven dialogue through CASAS. So that's what we have for you, people. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much, Kathleen and Tom, for providing us with this great information and this great protocol to use for data dialogues. I just want to remind folks that those handouts are already embedded in the Whova application at the bottom of the page for this session. And then if you don't mind, before your next session starts at noon, you could always go and rate this session as well to give your feedback about this presentation that you were just part of.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our presenters.